The next Superman film, titled Man of Tomorrow, was just announced by James Gunn with a July 2027 release date, and I am excited. So excited that I cannot stop thinking about all of the different directions that the sequel may go, and because of that, I wanted to make a video detailing some of the things that I want to see in Superman Man of Tomorrow. Of course, this is just my own opinion, and I'm sure what you want to see in Superman Man of Tomorrow differs heavily from what I want to see, so please in the comments down below, let me know what you want to see in the sequel. First up, I want to talk about villains. Now, the overall details we have about the film are extremely limited. However, it does seem like Lex and Superman will team up in some capacity based on the art that we got alongside the announcement of the film. Now, of course, alongside the art of them standing next to each other, seemingly all buddy-buddy, there was also art of them fighting. So I do not think Lex is going to just turn into Superman's best friend and be a great guy for the entirety of the movie. I'm almost certain he will be up to something villainous at some point, and almost certainly will try to stab Superman in the back. But I do think the idea of them working together is hinted at enough that I'm going to run with that idea when making this video. This of course raises the question as to what is the threat that would cause Superman and Lex to potentially work together, and I really hope the answer to that question is Brainiac. Now, I do think there are other villains that could cause Lex and Superman to work together, some examples being Mongol and the Authority, who I will talk a bit more in depth about later, as those are threats powerful enough for Superman to need help from others. However, I do think that the clear choice has to be Brainiac, as he is the villain that most fans want to see. He's a villain that is so important to Superman, and it's absolutely crazy to think that we have not yet seen Superman versus Brainiac on the big screen. Additionally, I think Brainiac works story-wise for a couple of different reasons. First off, he is a villain powerful enough to threaten all of humanity, and even though Superman has defeated him on his own many times, you can scale his power up enough that would warrant others getting involved, for example, the likes of Lex Luthor. He is a character that can provide far more knowledge about Kal-El's Kryptonian heritage, which is something that I'm sure we will learn a bit more about in Supergirl, but I would love to learn far more about Krypton from a character like Brainiac, and it is very possible that Kara is currently hiding some truths about Krypton from Clark, and only somebody like Brainiac would be able to reveal more details about what Krypton was like to him, whether that's through Brainiac's own knowledge that he chooses to share with Kal-El, or perhaps the city of Kandor, which I think would be awesome to see as part of Brainiac's collection if he is the villain in the film. I truly do believe that there is a lot more to learn about Krypton in this universe, based on how Lara and Jor-El were depicted in the first movie, which I know was not a groundbreaking depiction, as there have been versions in the comics that were not as good of heart compared to what we usually get in Superman films. However, for many in the general audience, this was a pretty big departure from what they were accustomed to seeing, and to be honest, a lot of people were quite upset as to how Lara and Jor-El were depicted in the movie. So I think it'd be wise to give a bit more context into what Krypton was actually like in the DCU. Now, I know some of you may push back and say that Brainiac is a Justice League level threat and perhaps should be saved for a Justice League movie, which I do think is a valid argument. Brainiac is certainly powerful enough to go toe-to-toe with the Justice League, but personally, I have always viewed him as more of a Superman villain, and I would rather him be a threat in a more Superman-centric movie. Additionally, even though the movie most likely won't result in the formation of the Justice League, it seems like a lot of the cast from the first film will be returning, and I think it's very possible we are going to see the Justice Gang team up with Superman, and most likely even somebody like Supergirl, if Brainiac is the threat of the movie. So even though we're not truly going to be getting the Justice League versus Brainiac, it is going to be basically the Justice League International alongside Superman and most likely Supergirl, which is close enough in my opinion. One quick note on the Justice Gang, who again, I think it's pretty safe to say will be in this film in some capacity, which I know to some people may be a bit disappointing, due to the fact that they wanted a much smaller scale Superman film, which I totally understand to a certain degree, but I am totally excited to see more of the Justice Gang in this universe, especially if we are to believe James Gunn, where this isn't a true sequel to Superman itself. Most likely it's going to be a bit more of an ensemble piece, and it would honestly feel weird if the Justice Gang didn't show up to help, considering how much they helped Superman within the first film, and in Peacemaker Season 2, we see Superman and even Supergirl working with the Justice Gang. And I'm really hoping by the time we see them in Man of Tomorrow, the team is expanded. Now, it is very likely that we see the team expanded by the end of Peacemaker Season 2, and in all honesty, the newest member could very well end up being Peacemaker, but I would love to see somebody like Blue Beetle, Booster Gold, or Martian Manhunter added to the team, making it much more like the Justice League International team from the comics. Now, even though I do really want to see the Justice Gang in this movie, I would not be devastated if they say didn't show up, but one character that I definitely think needs to play a very major role in this movie is Supergirl, as I think she is just so important to also building out more of Clark's other side side of his family, not just the ones that he has on Earth, but of course his Kryptonian family. And I really want to see this version of Kal and Kara interact more in the DCU. Again, I do briefly want to talk about some other villains, because right now I'm kind of painting myself into a corner where it needs to be Brainiac, and if I'm being 100% honest, I'm going to be a little disappointed if it's not Brainiac, but there are plenty of other villains that I do think could make for a really compelling Superman sequel and also warrant Lex and Superman working together. At the top of that list would be Mongol, who is certainly a villain powerful enough to get Superman and Lex Luthor to work together. He is a character that I've absolutely wanted to see in the DCU, but I'll be honest, I'd be a bit surprised if it ended up being Mongol. I do think that the Authority could work as well. Of course, we already have one member of the Authority and the Engineer that played a major role within the first Superman movie, and perhaps the Authority itself rises up as a team inspired by the events of Hawkgirl at the end of the first Superman movie, where she took matters into her own hands and killed the leader of Baravia. Additionally, I've always been really intrigued by the idea of the Authority within this universe, and I've always wanted to see them. Now, I do think taking something like Superman Truth, Justice, and the American Way and using that as inspiration for a Superman sequel would be really cool. Just replacing the Elite with the Authority, I think they could basically serve the same purpose. But if we're being honest, Lex is far more likely to help out the Authority and hell, even fund their actions against Superman instead of actually rising up to stop them. Now, perhaps in the movie, if it did end up being the Authority, Lex could be playing Superman, pretending to be on his side, only to turn on him and take the Authority side at the big final battle. But if we're being honest, I'm sure WB and James Gunn want the sequel to be even bigger than what Superman was when it came out this year, and I don't know if selling Superman versus the Authority really gets the buzz as something like Superman versus Brainiac for the first time on the big screen. And I do think the Authority could even be saved for a Justice League versus the Authority movie, where perhaps the Justice League is created to rise up against the Authority if they are established in this universe, which is still a big if, even though James Gunn has said on multiple occasions, of course, he wanted to do an Authority movie, and we got the Engineer in the first movie. Their future in this world definitely seems a bit blurry, and we really have no clear idea as to when they may even show up, if at all. Additionally, I think Parasite would be a lot of fun to finally see in a live-action Superman movie, but come on, the answer is Brainiac. Not only is that the character that I think honestly works really well story-wise, but is without a doubt the character that I want to see most star as a villain in a Superman movie. One thing that I absolutely need more of in the sequel is the Daily Planet, and specifically Clark Kent. Now, in the first film, I totally understand not having a lot of Clark. The movie itself moved at an immensely fast pace over the span of a few days, and a good chunk of that time Superman spent locked up in Planet Watch's prison. It was clear that the story James Gunn wanted to tell was about Superman standing in the world, and I was totally cool with that. However, in the limited screen time with Clark that we got within the movie, I was really digging the portrayal of that side of the character. Most notably, I thought that the interview scene was an absolute highlight and was the scene in the movie where I fully bought Corrin Sweat's casting. And I really want to see Corrin Sweat get the opportunity to play more of that side of the character. Additionally, I would like a bit more of a focus on Clark's actual journalism. Not just the stories that he gets with Superman, but real investigative work that he's doing, as he does take immense pride in his work that he does for the Daily Planet. I think a really cool way that you could do that would be to have Clark working on a story about Lex and having him interview Lex while he is at Belle Reve. Now, of course, this could also be done by Lois, which in all honesty probably makes a bit more sense considering she is the much more accomplished journalist. But I have always really enjoyed the dynamic of Clark and Lex, especially when looking at something like All-Star Superman, where we see Clark interview Lex in jail. And I do think it could work story-wise because, of course, every place like the Daily Planet would be lining up to talk to Lex after the events of Superman, but it also would be a great opportunity for Clark to learn more about Lex and see if he has changed at all while being in prison. Lex pretending to be reformed could be one of the main reasons why Superman potentially reaches out to Lex for help. However, zooming out on Clark and focusing just on the Daily Planet as a whole, I want them to have a much larger role as well. I did enjoy what we got from them in Superman, but truthfully, it wasn't a lot. Now, I'm not saying I need a dedicated Steve Lombard subplot where we learn about what his life is like at home, but I just want the Daily Planet to have a bit more initiative in the sequel. Outside of Lois and Jimmy, they really didn't have anything to do, and if we're being honest, most of the heavy lifting in the Superman movie was done by Eve. I would like to see specifically Lois less sidelined in the third act and really being an investigative reporter. And I think it'd be great to see her play a large role in perhaps uncovering the truth of whatever Superman and Lex are possibly fighting in the movie. Another thing that I would love to see more of is the fortress. I absolutely love the exterior design of the fortress in the first film, and it was awesome to see something like the Superman robots adapted into a live-action movie, but I want them to truly go all out and show us some other iconic parts of the fortress. For example, the intergalactic zoo, the steel diary, weapons he has confiscated, as well as many other things from previous encounters in the DCU. Now, of course, we know that Lex is going to be playing a major role in the movie, and when it comes to Lex in this movie, I really do hope we get to see the side of the character character that can be good, and I want to be clear, can be good when he chooses to be. Another version of Luthor that we've gotten so far in the DCU has been truthfully an awful human being, but I do think Lex is a character that is actually pretty fun to see play the good guy. For example, if the threat in the movie is someone like a Brainiac or a Mongol, Lex would certainly help out even a character like Superman if it meant the preservation of humanity. Lex is at his best, in my opinion, when he's able to have an almost dual personality, where in the eyes of the public he appears to be a very good guy, but of course he is still the egomaniac that cannot stay out of his own way and is constantly trying to take out Superman, or at the very least prove he's better than Superman. Now, there are some moments within Superman where we get to see a little bit of this, for example when he goes on the talk show or when he's meeting with Rick Flag Sr. and other members of Congress, but I definitely want to see more of this duality when it comes to Lex in this upcoming movie. Now, when saying that I want to see the good side of Lex, I want to be very clear. I am not saying that I want to see him redeemed. I am sure he will turn on Superman at some point in this movie, and I'm sure even if the film ends with them as untrusting allies, Lex will certainly be plotting his next scheme to take out Superman for a future film, and I really would love to see Lex's arc in the movie end with him running for president. Perhaps Lex does help Superman save the day, or at least makes it look that way to the public, and uses that good publicity to turn enough people in his favor to make a run for president actually seem viable. I know Lex as president isn't everyone's favorite plot, but personally I think it's a really interesting moral dilemma for not only Superman, but also the other heroes inhabiting the DC universe who truly know what Lex is. Additionally, I always think it's always fun to see when Lex does good just to spite Superman, and I certainly would love to see Holt get the opportunity to play President Luthor. Additionally, when talking about more things that I hope this film sets up for the future, I would absolutely love to see Superboy hinted at in this movie. Gunn and even Zaslav have talked about this super family saga that is in the works, and I absolutely think that the super family is not complete without the inclusion of Superboy. Now, I would assume if they were to adapt Superboy in the DCU, it would be the version of the character that shares both Lex and Superman's DNA, instead of using Cadmus director Paul Westfield, which is what I personally feel is a far more compelling story, as there's just so many more narrative threads you can pull on with him sharing the DNA of the world's greatest hero and the world's greatest villain. Additionally, I think it works story-wise because this version of Lex has already attempted to clone Superman. Of course, it was an imperfect clone, and I could definitely see this version of Lex Luthor having the ego to believe the missing part in perfecting a Superman clone would be his own DNA. But I'm not ashamed to admit, the main reason I'm pitching this is not because of the story implications of it, it's just because I think Superboy is a great character, and I absolutely want to see him in the DCU. However, that wraps up my list. I want to know what you want to see in Man of Tomorrow. Please let me know in the comments down below. Leave a like if you enjoyed the video, and subscribe if you're not yet already. It does immensely help out the channel. Thank you all so much for watching, and I will see you all in another video.